You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Hey folks, welcome back to the show. I know that you think we're just some smooth talkers, some slick, cool guys talking about footwear all the time, but we actually do know what we're talking about. And as much as we're, as well as an interviewers as we are, and get all the CEOs and C-suite folks to spill all the secrets and beans on this show, we do, as the Footwear Industries Business and Trade Association, as FDRA and Fannie. Now they're running market weeks in New York. We collect and analyze a ton of data. And that's both, in terms of, specific data we get from retailers across the country every single week, but also we look at top level data. And it's really hard right now to measure data to data, right? Because we're such a weird environment, but we still, we go and we glean government data in terms of sales, prices, commodity cost, a number of things for our members, and put it out in real time, usually on our Tuesday calls at 2 p.m. So any member who's out there, you can go to FDRA.org and you can sign up for that Tuesday call and listen in real time on a marketplace update. Right now, supply chain updates are really huge from ports, from service providers, from carriers, etc. But the most recent thing that we saw that just came out, this is a real-time podcast here. Hot off the press, retail prices, consumer prices, producer prices, the inflation that was transitory, that is not transitory, that may not be transitory, that going forward may continue or may not continue, but looks like it will continue. I think that's the government's position from the economists. I think that
sounds right. Now let me ask you a question, Andy. What were you doing in December of 1990? Where were you? How old were you?
December of 1990. I feel like, I think the Cincinnati Reds went to the World Series.
You're right. They beat the A's, I believe.
I was a kid. I was a big baseball fan. I was like 11 or 12. I feel like I can even feel then. I felt like that decade was going to be the greatest decade in human history and experience. And I even knew that as
right.
Polk the Prophet.
It's all downhill since.
Yeah, Polk the Prophet back in that day. What was happening in 1990?
December 1990. It was December of my 8th grade year. I was living in Northern Virginia. That was the last time, Andy, that we saw inflation as high as we saw just last week. 6.2% in October of 2021. The biggest growth since December of 1990.
Wow. And that's just before we invaded Iraq the first time.
Somewhere around that,
George H.W. Bush was president. We didn't even know a guy named Slick Willie yet. Wasn't even on the radar. Maybe in Arkansas, if you're from Arkansas. Wow. So is that 30 years?
Yeah, 31 years.
Right at 30?
Almost 31 in December.
So this inflation can drink now. I mean, he's well into his drinking
Exactly.
age.
And, when you think about the politics of the time, you had George H.W. Bush lose an election based a lot on it's the economy, stupid, right? And it's it was the notion that inflation was setting in and things were getting tighter for consumers. And here we are, fast forward 31 years, and we saw a huge jump in October. And
can we say it's the inflation stupid then? I mean,
you might want to coin that. Print a bumper sticker and a T-shirt and see if you can sell it to whoever's going to run against President Biden in 2024. Because I think it is inflation. It is here, and it's not transitory, to say the least.
No, I don't. Yeah, and I always think in terms of obviously retail at big box is very competitive. So as costs go up, prices have to go up a little bit. But there's nowhere to hide it anymore. And if, costs went down, prices could go down at big box retailers. I don't think they'll necessarily go down with brands. I think once brands push the price up, they're not going to try to discount it back down. So there's going to be this really interesting world in which maybe next year we're getting product in, the supply chain costs kind of level out. Hopefully they drop down a lot, but they level out. We get some certainty again, and then we can figure out our cost strategies and our pricing strategies. But it doesn't feel like it's going down. If wages are going up, a worker's not going to go all of a sudden take less wages. So your labor's still going to be high regardless of whether your supply chain costs go down. So I just don't see inflation. That's why transitory is such a weird thing, especially around retail. Like if your labor costs are going up substantially, a worker's not going to take less in the future. It just doesn't work.
How it works. That's for sure. Now, if you look at the forward retail prices in October, so 6.2% overall consumer price index, CPI. If you look at footwear retail prices, same time period, we climbed 5.2%. That is an unusually high increase for footwear retail, particularly as we've had 6 straight months of increases. So the question comes down to how long will this last, Andy? One of the things that we've been talking to, and our listeners will hear, further conversations they come out in the coming weeks with executives. But one of the things we've been talking about is the flip side of this inflationary narrative is there's no more promotion, right? Sales are full price. There's scarcity of product, which can be a good thing for sales and for demand and for full price sell through. And so all that's happening right now. So we've kind of moved away from the promotional activity that we saw for about a decade. And so it won't last forever. And I don't know when the bottom will drop out, but our retailers are pretty pleased with the amount of demand that's out there and their ability to sell at full price. So it's not all bad stuff.
So we look at these numbers all the time and try to make sense of it, like actual sense. We don't just throw it out there, but we try to make real sense of it. And in the numbers, you can look, it was April or May, somewhere in there, the prices started to jump. And that is exactly when we started to see supply chain cost increases, scarcity issues, congestion issues. We started to see COVID issues at the factories closing down again. So you can pinpoint exactly when these prices started to increase again. And that was against maybe 10 or 12 months of huge declines in prices where there was discounting to move product because of the uncertainty during COVID in 2020, whether there were going to be sales or not. So all of a sudden it's a complete shift in mentality. My concern is the basket of goods and services that you look at from an economic viewpoint of a working class person going, and they're going to buy a pair of shoes for their kid, but then they got to buy the backpack and they got to buy the pencils like back to school, but also, everything else. Their grocery costs are going up. The fuel costs are going up substantially, and those don't look to decrease because OPEC is not opening up reserves. The U.S. typically does not tap strategic reserves in this environment. The challenge, again, we look at this, and we talked, there was this big globalization fight in the 2016 election, right, between Trump and between Clinton. And they kind of agreed. This goes back to that TPP debate we had in footwear, right? Like opening up markets and allowing duty-free access and getting duty-free come in. There was this fight about what that meant for America and how this globalism's kind of ruined our economy. And now it's like, actually, we're more ever reliant than ever before, even after all those debates. The trade deficit has ballooned even with new tariffs added. We're seeing problems with product. It doesn't matter where it is around the world. If there's high COVID cases, it doesn't matter if your factory is in Ethiopia or whether it's in South America. If your COVID cases are high, there's disruption. Their container disruptions are global. And now we're seeing energy prices globally have shocks everywhere because of coal issues in China, where weather's getting a lot colder and they're using a lot more coal. And we're seeing energy rationing in China, and that's affecting coal prices and energy prices here, fuel prices everywhere. I mean, it is to go back to that mentality of saying, well, we need to be less interconnected. And it's like, it's nice on paper and it's nice as a verbiage for politics, but it's not how the world economy works anymore, and you can't unravel it. So that's the problem for our footwear industry. Is it's great that we can get the price stability a lot better. The concern is, are they going to buy the extra pair of shoes if they're having to spend the extra money on gas or bananas or turkeys or whatever it is as part of that? And the one benefit we did see, Matt, was over this past year, the spending actually ballooned compared to even 2019, right? 2019, we were trying to get close to 85 billion year over year consumer spending on footwear. Up, it would have some up to like 90 billion year over year. Now we're over 100 billion a year in total consumer spending in the U.S., which equates to basically $50 more per person spent on footwear, which basically is like an extra sneaker per person in the U.S., which is great. But the challenge is, will that remain even if they have money in their pocket, will that remain with them having to spend more on gas prices or turkeys?
Yeah, the footwear inflation is not in a vacuum, Andy, as you've articulated, right? So that's the big concern. And even if you just look at boys and girls shoes in October, they shot up 7.5%. So that 5.2% increase in retail prices for footwear were driven predominantly by the price for kids shoes. And kids shoes have the highest duty rates of any of our types of shoes. And so if you think about duty just as a percentage of the FOB price, the freight on board price, the price that the shoe costs to get to the border, then that's increasing based on all the things you just talked about, the movement of goods and bringing product in and manufacturing the product and the inputs that go into the product and the energy used to make the product and the labor used to make the product. All in, that's higher. And so the percentage is a static percentage, but at the same time, the underlying price has gone up. So people are going to be paying more at the border, and thus consumers will pay more. And so that's what we have to keep an eye on, because there'll come a time when stimulus dries up, when the advance the government's giving on everyone on their child tax credits will dry up. And at some point, how do you the government's got to figure out how to softly land this plane. And that's Biden and Powell's and other people smarter than us, their job. But there's political treachery, if you will, for those who can't do it and don't do it well. And I think that's what's got a lot of retailers concerned. The party that's going on right now is awesome, right? Like the champagne's flowing and everyone's high five and no one's worried about tomorrow. But there's a couple people starting to think about what's around the corner and what happens when the stimulus dries up and what happens when the consumer is not as motivated and what happens when inflation really takes hold. And to your point, when we started this whole conversation, these are unprecedented times with no kind of manual and no standard data set that we can go back and look at and say, hey, all right, now we know where this is headed based on X, Y, and Z, because there really hasn't been an X, Y, and Z for much of what we faced this year.
Yeah, it's almost like for 30 years we've been on autopilot for inflation issues, right? No one's really had to flex their muscle or their mental capacity in terms of how you deal with some inflation issues. It's been very deflationary. I mean, just look at the cost of televisions and how you basically can get a cost of a TV now, a flat screen, 4K, fully digital and streaming for $100, right? And the quality is amazing and the cost is so cheap. Same with computers, all our productivity devices that we've had, even phones. I mean, now Apple's having to reduce costs on their phones that are coming out now, even as the capacity. I heard the other day it was like the new iPhones are better cameras than traditional cameras with like the megapixels and all that, because of the computing power that these devices have, which is crazy when you think about it. But all that's deflationary. We've been used to that. But as we look at the government and what they're going to do, it's been 30 years since they've had to flex any sort of muscles to figure that out, to land the plane. So they got to disengage the autopilot and they got to keep look at things about what's happening. And I think we have the tools. It's just a question of do they engage the landing gear quickly, or do they let it glide a little bit further before we hit the ground? In some ways, is it going to drag a little bit, or are they going to kind of hit it? We've all had this where they just hit the pavement super hard and you bounce up and down a little bit, right? We don't know yet. Turbulence on the ground. So, I guess we'll see what happens. We'll keep tracking this data. We keep informing our members every single week. Also, Matt, I think what'll be interesting too is the pricing strategies we're continually seeing at retail, where in the past, they would outline, in August what their holiday promotional schedule is going to look like and how they're going to, and I think in real time, they're having to make adjustments and changes as product scarcity issues, but also foot traffic issues or conversion rate. So there's a constant like switch in real time of what they're doing that creates a little chaos. And I think even after the holiday, we're going to see, it sounds weird to say, did we bring in too much product that we couldn't get to the store that's sitting in the warehouse? And then now it's already wintertime and no one wants the sneaker. They need the boot. And what do you do with the sneaker? Do you just hold on to it in the warehouse until spring? Or are you going to have a clearance? And then all of a sudden prices again are going to shift dramatically downward because you have to do a promotion to get rid of inventory that couldn't get to a store shelf or to a consumer because of these delays.
Yeah, use your crystal ball for summer of 22, Andy, and you're a buyer and you're thinking about what the consumer wants for holiday and you're starting to place orders and get the product in, and your comps are holiday of 21. I mean, I do not envy that. Those footwear professionals are going to have to make those predictions as to what the consumer has the appetite for in 22, holiday 22, based on what happened in 21, which was an anomaly, which was based on 2020, which is an anomaly. Like, I don't know when this whole thing will right size, but you mentioned talking about kind of communicating the cost impact. And I think our team at FDRA did a crack job of just kind of putting something into context that would blow your mind as you think about increased costs. And that is in August of 2021, the footwear industry saw $467 million in duties and import charges in the month of August alone. And if you take that out, that's enough to buy a beer and a hot dog for every single resident of Texas and Georgia, the home states of the World Series that just completed. Every one of them a beer and a hot dog at stadium prices, which is like 3 times the cost that you can get at the grocery store. So that just tells you kind of the day-to-day impact, the amount of money that we're paying, and how that's going to cycle through. And the challenge, Andy, is that it's a snapshot in time that's already happened. So when this data dumps on us today or yesterday or whenever the consumer price indexes comes out, it's already happened, right? And so we're in the middle of already driving further inflation and not pulling, the levers to pull things are based on what you're seeing, something that's happened in the past. And I think that's one of the challenges for the government. It doesn't move that quickly. And it's difficult for them to be agile and to meet policy needs for something that's super dynamic.
I mean, just talking about this, I fully understand why Cliff Sifford retired, and good job, Cliff. Old Kenny Loggins fan, no doubt, knew when to hold him and when to fold him.
Kenny Rogers, not Kenny Loggins.
Old Kenny Rogers fan, like I said. Maybe you misheard.
Kenny Loggins' danger zone, which also applies to where we are right now with inflation.
Maybe you're Aaron Rodgers and you misheard what I was saying. Okay? That's clearly what happened here, okay? I'm sorry if you misrepresented my facts, Matt. I said Kenny Loggins. So thank you very much. Okay. So we'll keep like I said, everybody thinks we're just smooth voices, but we're trying to
we're trying to edit this out just to show you that this is how it really happens.
Edit. What's editing? I don't even know.
You've never edited 300 episodes, maybe like twice. I think twice.
And I know exactly when those episodes were. It's like when you're succeeding and you never really think about it in the past, but you fail one time and you're like, that's all you think about. That's what I think about, is if we have to edit an episode, we failed our guest and we failed ourselves and we failed our listeners. And I don't like that.
It's like when Drago in Rocky IV, the Russian who's unbeatable, gets punched by Rocky and bleeds. He doesn't know what blood is. He's never bled, right? That's how we feel when we have to edit a podcast.
The one thing that is the saving grace is we don't produce this or have to do anything. And so it runs downhill on our producers. So we can just blame them for any ills that
Which is the talent. They can't deal with it. They can't deal with it.
It's a capitalist economy, So that's the way it goes. Anyway, folks, as always, we thank you for listening at shoeandshow.com. You can see the entire catalog of this year's been a fantastic year in terms of the quality of executive we've had on to talk about how they're changing their business in real time. So please go back to, I even think, the episodes we're having in January, even as we were going through that COVID strain that was coming through, the conversations were really impactful around culture, around change, about how to deal with change, all those things super relevant today. So a lot of the shows that we have in the past are still quite timeless and timely. So please go back and listen to those. Please stay close. Again, I'll mention Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we do a member call. Every person who is a part of a member company at FDRA can join those calls and listen in. Some of it's therapeutic, some of it's data dump, some of it's just information, intelligence, and forecasting to help you see marketplace issues in real time and before they become challenges. So please join those, and please reach out to us as you go through the business cycles and your business challenges so that we can help serve you better as your footwear business and trade association. On behalf of Matt and myself, we thank you again for listening, and next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.